So, I've been playing through Code Vein, a 2018 Souls-like that mashes up Dark Souls with goofy anime shit. Its main selling point is that instead of having one or two waifus, it has infinite waifus, and it's fine. The game works, the combat is smooth, the story is entertaining enough to drag you from place to place, but the game doesn't quite click. There hasn't been a point where everything comes together in an aha moment where the mechanics, story, and tone perfectly interact. Now, full disclosure, I haven't beaten Code Vein. As of writing, I'm at the Cathedral of the Sacred Blood, so this isn't a review of the game, but rather a collection of observations from the early game that, I think, shed light on what makes the Souls games work, and what's kept many of its imitators from breaking out. The mistake that Code Vein and many other Souls-like games make is that they treat Dark Souls like an action game and use it as a template for their own action game. This is a mistake because Dark Souls is not primarily an action game, but an adventure game, and it is the adventure aspect that makes both Demon's Souls and Dark Souls successful. It's understandable why players and developers would think of the series as action games. Critics praised the early Souls games for their stamina system that limits consecutive actions, the number of weapons the game has, the variety of moves like parrying and backstabbing, and the difficulty of the combat. You also have the fact that puzzle bosses were basically criticized out of the series by fans. So, as a developer, it only makes sense to treat the Souls-like genre as an action subgenre. But the actual hero of Dark Souls, and what makes the early games so memorable, are their adventure and tone, and not their combat. Let's look at a comparison to see this in action. First, here's a section of Cathedral of the Sacred Blood, as you work your way towards the cathedral. Now, let's look at the Dark Souls level that inspired it, Anor Londo. Here's the section of that level where you bust into the main castle. Notice the difference? As an action set piece, Cathedral of the Sacred Blood is much harder. You are basically in an endless gauntlet of ramparts that are almost exclusively testing your combat skills. Even the more adventurous stuff, like unlocking shortcuts, is undone by the checkpoints you almost always get after unlocking shortcuts. In Anor Londo, you're fighting on ramparts, but you're also climbing along scaffolding, scaling buttresses, and restructuring the level to fit your needs. The game is giving you different challenges. It's asking you, can you beat this guy? Can you negotiate this obstacle? Can you figure out a way around these archers? Can you find the shortcut? While Cathedral of the Sacred Blood has some adventuring, like forks in the road, it basically amounts to complete all of the linear hallways until you reach the end of the level. Even though the Anor Londo archers are pretty whack, the level feels like a real place that you're trying to break into. Everything about the architecture of the level makes sense. I understand why someone would build this place. But Cathedral of the Sacred Blood? What the fuck is this? And why would somebody build so much extra shit that leads nowhere? One more example of adventure making the Souls games are the bosses. This is going to be maybe the most controversial take in this video, but puzzle bosses are absolutely necessary to the Dark Souls formula. Dark Souls 3 is the worst in the series, precisely because almost all of its bosses are combat checks. Code Vein uses the Dark Souls 3 attitude. The first 4 bosses are all combat checks. Oliver Collins, Butterfly of Delirium, Insatiable Despot, and Invading Executioner are all combat checks that teach early game players that bosses are going to be combat tests and little else. This is fine, but let's look at Demon Souls and see how it compares. There are a lot of possible bosses that could be your first 4 in Demon Souls, but let's pick these 4. Phalanx, Tower Knight, Fool's Idol, and Man-Eaters. Phalanx and Tower Knight are combo puzzle combat bosses. Fool's Idol is a puzzle boss, and Man-Eaters are a combat boss. This is great because this variety keeps the player on their toes and makes the world feel more real. Bosses should not be thought of as the final combat obstacle of a level, but rather the final obstacle of a level, whatever type of obstacle that may be. Again, this makes the world feel like a real place you're discovering. It makes sense that a badass like Flame Lurker would be guarding the Dragon God, or that False King Alot would be smacking the shit out of you to protect his true sloppy boy self. But you also need bosses like True King Alot and Maiden Astraea to make the world feel like a lived-in place that you're discovering. These bosses can also be important for establishing tone, and that real Dark Souls experience is all tone. The Souls games are hard, but they're often made harder by tone. The first time I played Demon Souls, I got killed by Vanguard, barely survived the horrors of Boletaria Castle, made it to the Tower Knight, and a stone dropped in my stomach. Not only, I thought, will I have to take on this guy, but I'll have to fight that dragon from the trailer. The world is lonely, it's dark, everything's dead or dying. Think about Blighttown. It wasn't until my 15th or so time entering Blighttown that I noticed you could see the sky. I just assumed darkness hung overhead. The atmosphere is so oppressive, and I was so far from home, that I'd never even bothered to look up. This cruel tone makes all the gameplay restrictions like stamina and equip load feel natural. You're alone, slow, dying. Code Vein, on the other hand, doesn't capture this tone, and it makes the combat feel off, mostly because of the stamina system. You play through the game with an AI partner, backstab and riposte animations are ridiculous, and a lot of it has either colorful or over-the-top anime design. The game tries in places to be dark, but that tone is too difficult to pull off in an anime style. While the atmosphere of Dark Souls made me play it methodically and buy into the stamina system, Code Vein's tone makes me want to play it like Nier Automata. This is, to me, what keeps Code Vein from clicking. Mechanics don't just exist in a vacuum. They're also part of the world you're building and the story you're telling. So if you're a designer looking to make a Souls-like, consider your story and your world. Then look to see what Souls mechanics enhance your game, and which ones can go away. Look at Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice. This is a Souls-like from Hidetaka Miyazaki, the creator of the Souls series, and it's a From Software joint. They knew, based on the story they wanted to tell, which mechanics to keep and which to get rid of. Sekiro tells a more involved story, so the character creation is gone, and the game wants you to play as a mobile ninja, moving with lightning-quick speed. So, gone are the stamina system, and the complex level-up system, and the many different equipable weapons and armor. Don't be afraid to get rid of Souls mechanics that don't work for your game. If I were making Code Vein, I would scrap stamina entirely, and I would also get rid of character creation. As deep and intricate as the character customizer is, and even though people love it because it's a waifu simulator, it doesn't work with the game. If you're telling an involved story, use a main protagonist like Sekiro. When you have the nameless, characterless player creation running around the story, it just makes so many cutscenes super fucking awkward. None of this is to say that Code Vein is a bad game, just that it's too in love with Souls mechanics for its own good. If it instead placed focus on its new innovations like its gift and blood code systems and scrapped some of the leftovers from Souls, it'd be a much better game. And I think that's the idea. Don't be too in love with your inspirations. That's what holds back many Souls-like games, and it's a real shame.